The roar starts underground, 30 miles south in the hills. You can't see it yet, but it's coming. Balm Fork Canyon, June 14th, 1903. 3:45 p.m. The sky turns green first, then black, split by lightning that cracks the air like bone snapping. Hail hammers down. Ice fists the size of walnuts shattering fence posts, scattering sheep across barren hillsides where grass used to grow before 500,000 hooves trampled it to dust. 4 inches of rain in 45 minutes on ground that can't absorb a drop. The grass is gone, the soil compacted, dead. The water doesn't soak in, it runs. Every rivulet becomes a stream, every stream a torrent. Three Forks, Balm, Hinton, Shobe merge into Willow Creek and accelerate downhill toward a town of 1,146 people who have no idea what's coming. The water picks up haystacks, chicken coops, fence posts, livestock. It doesn't flow, it avalanches. In Heppner, 9 miles downstream, it's Sunday afternoon. The temperature drops. The sky darkens, but that's normal for late storms in eastern Oregon. Children play in yards. Families finish Sunday dinner. Roast beef, potatoes, bread still warm from the oven. Churches prepare for evening service. The Methodist congregation is already gathering. The air smells like rain and hay and the faint sulfur tang of distant lightning. At 4:30 p.m., the first drops hit Main Street. Soft, gentle, then harder. Then the hail arrives, not scattered, not gradual. A wall of ice hammering roofs, shattering windows, bouncing off dirt streets like gunfire. The noise drowns out voices. Families rush inside, slamming doors, laughing nervously at the ferocity of it. Children press faces to windows, watching ice pile in drifts against fence posts. It's just weather. It'll pass. It always does. Sunday supper can wait. Church can wait. The storm will blow through in 20 minutes, maybe less. But up at the south edge of town, where Willow Creek narrows into a culvert, something is holding. The steam laundry, a 2-story wooden structure built directly over the creek, spans the water like a bridge. Inside, the owner's family and 6 Chinese workers are finishing the day's labor, folding linen still warm from the presses. When they hear it, a roar, low, growing, coming from upstream, not thunder, something else. The laundry owner steps outside into the hail, looks upstream, sees the wall, black, churning, 40 feet high, carrying trees, haystacks, livestock, boulders, entire fence lines twisted into barbed wire sculptures. He has 3 seconds to scream before the wave hits. The flood slams into the laundry and stops. For 30 seconds, maybe a minute, the building holds. Water backs up behind it. Pressure builds. The creek becomes a lake. The structure groans, timbers cracking, walls bowing inward. Inside, workers scramble for the stairs. The water is at their ankles, then their knees. Then it's not water anymore. It's silt, debris, logs spinning like battering rams, sheep carcasses tumbling in the current. The floor tilts. Someone screams. A window shatters. The building shudders. And then it gives. The laundry explodes outward, releasing not a flood but a liquid avalanche. 30 to 40 feet high, 50 feet wide, carrying the building and everyone inside it downstream in a roar that drowns out the hail. The wave accelerates, picks up speed, picks up mass, picks up houses. By the time it reaches Main Street, 3 blocks downstream, it's moving faster than a galloping horse, heavier than concrete, deadlier than anything eastern Oregon has ever seen. 5:00 p.m. Bert Phelps is standing on the Willow Creek Bridge when he sees it. Not water, a wall, black, 40 feet high, moving like a locomotive, carrying entire buildings in its teeth. He turns and runs, boots slipping in mud, coat flapping, waving his arms and yelling words no one hears through the hail. He bursts through his front door just as the house lifts off its foundation. The entire structure rises, spins, begins to float downstream like a toy boat in a bathtub full of razors. Upstairs, Cora Phelps is nursing the baby, watching the storm with her sister-in-law and daughter Margaret. She sees Bert's face, wild, panicked, eyes too wide, and knows. She grabs Margaret with one arm, the baby with the other, and runs for the stairs. The water hits. 2 feet of ice-cold sludge slams through the ground floor, spinning furniture, collapsing walls, tearing the kitchen from its moorings. They make it to the second floor. Barely. The house shudders, groans, begins to move downstream, spinning counterclockwise, colliding with other houses, also floating, also spinning, also full of people screaming names into the hail. Outside, houses are floating, spinning, colliding midair like atoms in a storm. The Methodist Church stands firm, brick, heavy, built to last, but the homes around it splinter into kindling. The Hotel Heppner, a 3-story wooden structure packed with Sunday guests preparing for supper, lifts off its foundation and rotates downstream. Walls peeling away, people clinging to window frames, screaming into the hail that no one hears. 9 guests die. Some say 50. The exact count is lost to chaos, to bodies washed too far, to rooms that collapse before anyone could count the people inside. The Palace Hotel, brick, 2 stories, anchored deep into bedrock, holds. 200 people are inside. The flood slams into it, splits around it like water around a stone, diverts slightly eastward. Downstream, the business district survives. Barely, but upstream, where residential neighborhoods cluster along the creek, entire blocks vanish in seconds. Houses that stood for 20 years become splinters in 20 seconds. Dan Stalter watches his house collapse. His wife disappears into the black, churning mass. Then 5 of his 6 children, gone before he can reach them, before he can scream their names. He grabs his youngest, a boy, maybe 6 years old, eyes wide with terror, pulls them into a wooden dry goods crate floating past and surrenders to the current. The crate spins, crashes into debris, flips upside down, somehow rights itself and stays afloat. When it finally beaches on high ground a mile downstream, Dan climbs out, holding his child. He's the only survivor from his family of 9. George Conser and his wife ride their house like a raft, water to their necks, debris slamming into the walls, fence posts, lumber, sheep carcasses, the splintered remains of someone else's life. The structure spins through town, colliding with trees, other homes, a wagon tangled in barbed wire that wraps around the porch like a net. When the house wedges against another building and stops, they claw their way out through a broken window, gasping, covered in mud that smells like death and sheep manure, and hailstones melting in their hair. F.G. Hart, assistant station agent at the depot, sees the water coming and makes a decision in half a second. 3 children stand in front of him. The Long kids, whose father ran back to save their invalid mother, and a little girl whose father is already gone, swept away by the current. Hart doesn't think. He grabs all 4, pulls them against his chest, and wades into the flood. Water to his armpits, then his neck, then his chin. Debris slams into his legs. Lumber, barbed wire, something soft that might be a body. He doesn't let go. When he reaches high ground behind the depot, all 4 children are alive, gasping, crying, clinging to his coat. J.M. Kernan, the regular station agent, follows behind with his wife. The current hits them. Kernan loses his grip. His wife survives. His body is found 3 days later, tangled in barbed wire near Lexington, 9 miles downstream. The town clock, mounted on a tower in the center of Main Street, stops at 5:15 p.m. Lightning, some say. Others say the water shorted the mechanism. Either way, the clock freezes, marking the exact moment Heppner ceased to exist as it was. By 5:45 p.m., the flood is over. The hail stops. The rain becomes a drizzle, then nothing. The sky clears. The sun sets over hills dotted with sheep, painting the wreckage in gold and crimson light that makes everything look beautiful and terrible at the same time. Willow Creek returns to a purling brook, ankle deep, flowing over stones as if nothing happened. But Main Street is gone. Houses that stood for 20 years are piled in splinters 3 blocks downstream. Entire families are missing. Bodies float in pools of stagnant water, trapped in collapsed basements. The air smells like wet wood, rot, manure, and something worse. The beginning of decomposition in 90-degree heat. Cora Phelps kneels on the floor of her attic, holding her baby, whispering prayers she can't remember later. The house stopped spinning. The water receded. Outside, the silence is unbearable. No voices, no movement, just the hum of flies beginning to gather over bodies not yet found. Survivors crawl from wreckage. They move slowly, dazed, covered in mud that dries in the evening heat and cracks like old paint. They call names into the darkness. Most names get no answer. Some get screams. Leslie Matlock and Bruce Kelly don't wait for dawn. They mount horses at 6 p.m. and ride north, cutting fence wire with knives, racing the flood downstream. The flood is slower now, wider, but still deadly. They reach Lexington in 40 minutes, shouting warnings, and people scatter to the hills, watching from high ground as water 3 feet deep rolls through Main Street, carrying debris from Heppner, furniture, lumber, bodies. They ride another 8 miles to Ione, passing the flood crest on the way, arriving just in time. Lexington loses buildings, fences, livestock. Ione loses crops and barns, but neither town loses a single person. Because 2 men on horses rode faster than water. Back in Heppner, night falls. No streetlights, no lanterns. The electricity is dead. The telegraph is dead. The telephone lines are down. Survivors gather in darkness, holding each other, counting who's left. The count gets smaller with every name called. You're inside this moment now. Stay with us. What happens next rewrote a town, a valley, a century of memory. Monday, June 15th. Dawn breaks over wreckage. The sun rises on a town transformed into a graveyard. Main Street is unrecognizable. Houses are stacked on top of each other like cards. The Methodist Church is flattened. Only 3 structures remain relatively intact on Main Street. The Palace Hotel, the Roberts Building, and one corner of the bank. The second floor of the Roberts Building becomes a morgue. Bodies pulled from the mud are carried up narrow stairs and laid on floors still wet from the flood. By noon, 17 bodies. By evening, 43. Families walk through rows of the dead, looking for faces they recognize. Some bodies are intact. Others are broken, crushed by debris, bloated from hours in the water. Some are children, babies, toddlers who drowned in their mother's arms. The heat is unbearable. June in eastern Oregon, 90 degrees by 10 p.m. Decomposition accelerates. The smell becomes a physical presence, thick enough to taste, thick enough to choke on. Burial is urgent. By Tuesday, Cemetery Hill is crowded with fresh graves, some marked with names, others with simple wooden crosses that say, "Unknown." Hailstones swept into deep drifts by the flood and buried under debris act as makeshift refrigerators, preserving some bodies long enough for identification. Rescue workers dig through wreckage and find corpses lying on beds of melting ice, faces still recognizable, clothes still intact, eyes still open, but not all bodies are found. Some are washed 45 miles downstream near the Columbia River, tangled in driftwood and barbed wire. Some are buried so deep in silt that they won't surface for weeks. Some are never found at all. By June 18th, the recovered body count reaches 167. By June 23rd, 178. Among them, Ray Long, 13 years old, found tangled in debris near the depot where his father left him 3 days earlier, thinking he was safe. Mrs. Robert Morgan, Iva Ashbaugh, Mrs. Frank Harriman, the Long family, mother, father, 4 of 7 children. The Chinese laundry workers whose names were never recorded, buried in a mass grave at the edge of Cemetery Hill. The final count settles at 247, nearly 1 in 6 residents, but some records list 251. Others say 300. The difference is lost to bodies washed too far downstream, families who left town and never returned to be counted, unidentified remains buried in unmarked graves. The telegraph is dead. The telephone lines are down. The railroad tracks are twisted into abstract sculptures of iron. The only communication with the outside world is horseback riders carrying handwritten messages to the Dalles, 50 miles away. The first message is simple: send coffins, send help, send everything. By Tuesday morning, the first relief train arrives from Portland, but the tracks are destroyed 17 miles outside Heppner, so passengers and supplies are transferred to wagons and hauled overland. Doctors, nurses, coffins, embalming fluid, shovels, tents, food, blankets, everything a town needs to bury its dead and begin again. The Oregon Railway and Navigation Company sends 2 trains on June 15th, free of charge, carrying residents who had been out of town and are now frantic to return. When they arrive and see the wreckage, many collapse. Some refuse to believe it. They walk through the ruins calling names, looking for houses that no longer exist, standing in empty lots where bedrooms used to be, where children used to sleep. By June 18th, 2,000 men are working cleanup in Heppner. They come from Portland, Pendleton, the Dalles, Baker City, towns across Oregon that heard the silence after the telegraph went dead and knew something terrible had happened. They bring wagons, horses, shovels, strongbacks, grim faces. They work in shifts, digging through debris, pulling bodies from mud, stacking salvageable lumber in piles for rebuilding. Every heap of debris might contain a body. Many do. Towns across Oregon cancel 4th of July celebrations and send the money to Heppner instead. Over $60,000 arrives in the first month, more than $1 million in today's currency. Churches hold special services. Newspapers run fundraising campaigns. The entire state mobilizes to save a town most people had never heard of. Portland collects so much money that Heppner asked them to keep part of it for the next emergency. On June 17th, martial law is declared. Shoot looters on sight. Anyone not willing to work must leave. Order is fragile in a town where every 3rd house is gone and every family has lost someone. Armed guards patrol the ruins at night, watching for movement, listening for voices that shouldn't be there. Reports of the death toll vary wildly in the first days. Some newspapers say 400 dead, others say 500. The chaos makes counting impossible. Bodies are still being pulled from the mud. Families are still missing. Children are still being found under collapsed walls, in basements filled with silt, tangled in fence wire miles downstream. The Oregonian sends a reporter named Leslie Scott. He arrives on June 16th and writes, "Scenes at Heppner are indescribable in their gruesomeness, their anguish, their awful desolation. No pen can exaggerate the horrors they present. Every heap of debris may contain a human-forming decomposition. Many do reveal such spectacles when uncovered, and meantime Willow Creek, as if to mock the dead, has returned to a purling brooklet. Engineers arrive with measuring tools and notebooks. They study the debris field, calculate flow rates, estimate discharge. 36,000 cubic feet per second at peak flow, more than the average annual flow of the Willamette River, compressed into a narrow canyon and released in minutes. The flood crest arrived simultaneously with the first water, confirming eyewitness accounts of a wall rather than a gradual rise. They study the hills, barren, overgrazed. 500,000 sheep had trampled the protective grass mat into dust over the previous 2 decades. Vegetation that once absorbed rainfall was gone. The soil, compacted and lifeless, couldn't absorb a drop. Every inch of rain became runoff. A storm 3 days earlier, on June 11th, had saturated what little absorptive capacity remained. When the cloudburst hit on June 14th, torrential rain and hail over a 50-square-mile area in less than an hour. The water had nowhere to go but down. 15 minutes. That's the gap between the first rainwater reaching Willow Creek and the arrival of the flood crest in Heppner. 15 minutes between routine Sunday afternoon and annihilation. 15 minutes between life and 247 bodies. The weather station in Heppner was destroyed. The observer and his entire family drowned. No rainfall measurements exist. Only the evidence. 247 dead. 140 buildings gone. A town erased in the time it takes to eat supper. If stories like this matter, if history carved in water and stone and grief deserves to be remembered, then stay. Listen. Let the echo reach you. By June 23rd, the railroad is rebuilt and trains roll into Heppner free of charge, carrying lumber, nails, tar paper, glass, food, hope. The business district rises first. Storefronts, banks, a new hotel built where the old one floated away. Then homes, built higher on the hillsides, farther from the creek. Foundations dug deep into bedrock that won't move, but not everyone stays. The 1910 census counts 880 residents, down from 146 before the flood. Some families pack what little remains and move west, to valleys without creeks, to towns built on flat land far from water. They leave behind graves on Cemetery Hill, where headstone after headstone carries the same date. June 14, 1903. They leave behind memories too heavy to carry. Others stay. They rebuild on higher ground. They dig new foundations into hillsides and refuse to forget. They plant trees where houses once stood. They rebuild churches. They reopen the bank, the general store, the blacksmith shop. They hammer nails into fresh lumber and pretend not to hear the creek flowing below. In 1948, Willow Creek floods again. Water rises. Families evacuate. But the town holds. The new houses, built on hillsides above the flood zone, remain dry. Damage is minor. Memory is strong. In 1971, the creek floods again. Again, the town holds. In 1983, 80 years after the disaster, a dam is completed immediately above town. 155 feet high, 55 million, designed to hold back the mountains if they ever try again. Willow Creek flows through a concrete throat now, controlled, measured, watched. The town grows, the population rises. By 1990, the population reaches 1,412, almost exactly what it was in 1903. The town rebuilds, thrives. Wheat fields stretch to the horizon, sheep graze the hills, though not 500,000 anymore. Children play along the creek, unaware that 90 years ago that creek became a grave. But June 14th never leaves. Every year on the anniversary, candles are lit along Willow Creek, not in mourning. Heppner isn't a town that mourns, in memory, in acknowledgement, in defiance. The candles mark where houses stood, where families lived, where a wall of water taller than a building turned a Sunday afternoon into Oregon's deadliest natural disaster. In 2003, a 3-panel stone monument is placed in town, listing the names of 247 people who died that day. Beside it, a panoramic photograph of the destruction, houses stacked like cards, Main Street buried in timber, survivors standing in mud, staring at the camera with expressions that hold no surprise, only exhaustion, only the knowledge that everything they knew is gone. The monument sits on the edge of Cemetery Hill, overlooking the valley. Below, Willow Creek winds through Heppner, ankle-deep, quiet, purling over stones. Sheep graze the hills. Wheat fields stretch to the horizon. The town hums with ordinary life. Coffee shops, schools, tractors rumbling past grain elevators. But if you stand at the monument and look downstream, you can still trace the path. The slight depression where Main Street was buried, the hillsides where people ran, the curve in the creek where the laundry stood, holding the flood for 30 seconds before it gave way and released hell. And if you listen, really listen, past the wind and the rustle of wheat and the hum of a town that refused to disappear, you can almost hear it. The roar, the thunder, the hail hammering wood, the screams, the moment before the wall arrived, when everything was still possible, when Sunday supper was being prepared and church bells were about to ring and Willow Creek was just a creek, ankle-deep and harmless, flowing through the center of a town that thought it knew what water could do. It didn't. The flood lasted less than 2 hours. The cleanup lasted months. The graves multiplied. The telegraph stayed silent for days. When it finally crackled back to life, the first message sent from Heppner was simple: send coffins, send help, send everything. The nation responded. Relief funds poured in from across the United States. President Theodore Roosevelt sent condolences. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco ran headlines about the Oregon town that vanished in an hour. For weeks, Heppner was the most famous town in America, famous for death, for disaster, for a flood that killed more people per capita than any natural disaster in Oregon history. But the echo, the names on the monument, the candles on June 14th, the stories passed down through generations, that echo is still moving through Heppner, through Oregon, through the history of a nation that learned, on a Sunday in 1903, That 15 minutes is all it takes for a creek to become a grave. Because Heppner didn't just survive, it rebuilt. It remembered, and every year when the candles are lit along Willow Creek, the town says the same thing it said in 1903, when survivors climbed out of the mud and looked at what remained. We're still here. The blast of water ended in seconds. The hail melted by morning. The sun rose on June 15th over a town transformed into a graveyard. Over bodies laid in rows on the second floor of the Roberts building. Over families walking through the dead, looking for faces they recognize. But the survivors didn't leave. They stayed. They buried their dead on Cemetery Hill, where headstone after headstone carries the same date. They hammered nails. They poured concrete. They planted trees. They rebuilt a town from memory and grief and refusal to let water win. And time in Heppner is measured in before and after. Before the wall and everything that came after. Before the roar and the silence that followed. Before 247 names were carved in stone, and after the candles started burning every June 14th, marking the moment a creek became a killer and a town became legend. If this story moved you, subscribe and keep its echo alive.